Every few years, billions of people do something remarkable. They choose who rules them. No kings, no armies, just a piece of paper dropped in a box. It's called democracy, and it is one of humanity's boldest experiments. Today, roughly half the world lives under it. But it was not always this way. For most of history, power came from the sword.
So how did we get from God kings to giving ordinary people a vote?
This is the story of democracy. To find its birth, we travel back 2,500 years. To a small rocky city in Greece, Athens. Athens, like everywhere else, was ruled by the rich and the powerful. The people were angry. The gap between rich and poor was tearing the city apart. Then a reformer named Solon began handing power back to ordinary citizens. And around 508 BC, a bold new system was born. They called it demokratia. Demos, the people. Kratos, power. Ordinary men gathered on a hillside and voted directly on their own laws. War, taxes, even exile were decided by a simple show of hands. It was loud, chaotic, and unlike anything the world had seen. But it had limits. Women, slaves, and foreigners could not vote. Still, an idea had been planted. That power could belong to the people. A few centuries later, another city took the idea further, Rome. The Romans hated kings, so instead they built a republic. A republic where citizens elect leaders to govern on their behalf. They built a senate, courts, and written laws that applied to all. And one crucial idea, that no single person should ever hold too much power. But Rome grew vast and hungry for power. Ambitious generals seized control. The republic collapsed into empire. For over 1,000 years, the light of democracy flickered and nearly died. Across medieval Europe, kings ruled by divine right, answering to no one. Until in 1215 England, the nobles finally had enough. They forced King John to sign a single historic document, the Magna Carta. For the first time, it declared that even the king must obey the law. It was a small crack in the wall of absolute power. Over centuries, England built a parliament where elected men could check the crown. Slowly, the people were finding their voice again. But real change would take a revolution of ideas. And it arrived in an age called the Enlightenment. In the 1600s and 1700s, thinkers began asking dangerous questions. John Locke argued that every person is born with natural rights, life, liberty, and property. That government is a contract, and its power flows from the consent of the governed. Montesquieu insisted that power must be split, so that power checks power. And Rousseau declared that the people themselves are sovereign. These ideas spread like wildfire, through books, cafes, and pamphlets. They were simple and explosive. Kings were not chosen by God. The people were. Ideas are dangerous things, and soon they erupted into revolution. In 1776, 13 American colonies rose up against the British king. They wrote their belief down, that all men are created equal. And built a new nation on a radical idea, government of the people, by the people. A written constitution split power 3 ways, so no tyrant could ever rise. Then in 1789, France exploded. The French tore down their monarchy in the name of liberty, equality, and brotherhood. But revolution is messy. France spiraled into terror and chaos, and a general named Napoleon crowned himself emperor. The dream seemed to fail yet again. But the ideas could not be unthought. Across the world, people had now seen that a king could fall. The 1800s became a long, hard century of struggle for the vote. At first, only wealthy men who owned land were allowed to choose. So workers organized and marched and demanded a say. Step by step, the vote was extended to all men, rich or poor. But half of humanity was still silenced: women. For decades, the suffragettes marched, protested, and were thrown in jail. In 1893, New Zealand became the first nation to grant women the vote. And one by one, others followed. People of every color, too, fought to be counted as equal. It took generations and staggering courage, but the promise was finally becoming real. One person, one vote. Democracy was starting, at last, to mean everyone. But the new century would test democracy like never before. After the First World War, fragile new democracies rose across Europe. Then came the Great Depression. Jobs vanished. People grew desperate. And desperate people will listen to strong men who promise order. In Italy, Germany, and beyond, dictators tore up the ballot box. They blamed enemies, silenced the press, and seized absolute power. And the world was plunged into a second devastating war. Democracy versus dictatorship for the very fate of the planet. At a staggering cost, the democracies prevailed. And they rebuilt, determined that it must never happen again. But a new rival now loomed. Communism in the East. For decades, a Cold War split the world between freedom and control. Then, as the century closed, something extraordinary happened. Dictatorships crumbled, walls came down, people chose freedom. From Eastern Europe to Latin America to Asia, democracy spread. By the year 2000, more people lived free than at any time in history. It seemed the whole world was moving in a single direction. So how does a democracy actually work? Because it is far more than just casting a vote. It is a whole system, carefully built to protect you. First, free and fair elections. Leaders are chosen and can be removed. Second, the rule of law. Even presidents must obey it. Third, a separation of powers, so no branch can control all the others. Fourth, basic rights. To speak, to gather, to worship, to protest. A free press to hold the powerful to account. And a promise that every citizen stands equal before the law. It is not one ruler deciding for everyone. It is millions of ordinary people deciding together. It is slow, it is loud, it is endlessly frustrating. But it belongs to you. And yet, democracy is fragile. It always has been. It is not a machine that runs itself. It survives only when people show up and take part. When citizens grow tired, or divided, or apathetic, cracks appear. Angry strongmen return, promising simple answers to hard problems. They attack the courts, the press, and the truth itself. Around the world, some democracies are quietly sliding backwards. Freedom, once won, can always be lost. History is clear on one thing. Democracy is never finished. It took thousands of years and countless lives to arrive here. From a hillside in Athens, to ballot boxes across the entire globe. The simple, stubborn idea that ordinary people together can rule themselves. It is messy, imperfect, and forever a work in progress. But as one leader said, it is the worst system except for all the others. Because the alternative is always the same. A world where the few decide for the many. Democracy is not a gift. It is a responsibility. It is fragile, and it is precious. And its future rests entirely with the people, with you. That is the story of democracy. Thanks for watching.